This video was only made possible through the very generous contributions of my patrons. Thank you. Their first concern always seems to be what needs to be done and what is the best procedure by which to do it. They are accomplishers. They are wired to do things and make things happen in the real world. And as far as I can tell, it is literally how they approach everything. They don't ever truly leave TE mode. Everything is approached in terms of the best possible way it could be done to get the best possible results. In a way oddly reminiscent of the INTP, they are unexpectedly self-conscious around crowds of people or respected persons, despite their general aura of self-assuredness. They approach their interactions with others in their extroverted thinking TE way, which can sometimes give one the impression that they are trying to recreate something intuitive and natural with wholly artificial tools, like rendering smooth curves with square pixels in a computer. They can get extremely good at it, but the air of artificiality and unnaturalness still lingers, though in some cases it actually contributes to a unique charisma of theirs. They can give off the aura that they somehow are used to interacting with people by fighting with them, not unlike two lion cubs play fighting. At bottom they still want to do that, sparring with people to test their strength, or otherwise using sharply direct methods to establish order in their environment. But people are soft and easily damaged, and the ENTJ realizes they have to hold back and be gentler with people. Generally speaking, they want to help people. They are actually quite humanitarian and even altruistic. They feel that things could be done better, that is, in a more rationally organized way, and they want to help people adopt those ways so that they don't suffer as much. But one of the things they learn very early on in life is that people don't often want to be helped in the ways the ENTJ offers for them. Their ideal image of themselves always seems to include notions of magnanimity and magnificence, which is fundamentally rooted in their tertiary extroverted sensation. They don't just want to be successful. If possible, they would like to play the part as well. They want to appear successful because they enjoy the sensual actualization. They feel a deep need for their environment to be rationally structured so that they can work with it safely and effectively. All in all, the image I'd like to propose here for your memory banks is that of an unjustly deposed emperor or empress. Having escaped to foreign lands, they retain the commanding presence they once had every right to, but in order to adapt to their new circumstances has toned that down as much as is prudent. Yet they still tend to take charge of situations among the foreign peasants, and gradually they are arranging affairs so as to take back their throne and save the kingdom from the tyrannical despot who took their place. So one of you guys can write a cool fan fiction of that or something. Extroverted thinking and introverted thinking are essentially reverses of each other. Both are seeking for rational consistency and order, but in a nutshell, extroverted thinking seeks for this order in the outside world, whereas introverted thinking is seeking instead for internal, theoretical consistency. Thus, extroverted thinking tends to be much more active than introverted thinking, actually seeking to elicit change in their environment so that it is clearly and efficiently organized. In a word, extroverted thinking wants things to make sense, which means that things are efficient, effective, consistent, etc. The universe is something of a machine for them, which they need to understand so as to interact with it properly and keep things running smoothly. And while introverted thinking is in a back room, writing an extremely detailed series of Wikipedia articles on how the machine works down to the smallest details and how they all hang together, extroverted thinking is actually out working on the machine in real time, In effect, they are trying to arrange themselves, their very body rhythms if necessary, to the rhythms of the machine of the universe, so that they can keep up with it. This is why, as Chad Crundle points out, they do not care about retaining every detail and foundational element of how the machine works in their head. What they want and need to know is the bottom line, that is, the actual real-world effect of these foundational elements. The introverted thinking type might know what every part of an engine is and precisely how it meshes with every other part, but the extroverted thinking type knows how to actually drive and maintain a car in any terrain. As an example, one very similar to that given by Chad, I recall a contrast between myself, an INFJ with introverted thinking, and my INTJ friend, alias Isaac Fisher, as I've mentioned before, with extroverted thinking. When learning mathematics throughout grade school, he often exceeded his teachers by several grades by discovering shortcuts before he was supposed to. This would often frustrate said teachers because he either wouldn't show his work at all, or when he did, he would complete the problems using methods and tricks which they had not taught. As far as he was concerned, what was important was the correct result, not how he got there. I, on the other hand, struggled with mathematics precisely because I felt the teachers did not sufficiently explain why on earth they were doing certain shortcuts, or even if they did explain that, they always seemed to take them entirely for granted because they were in such a rush to move on to the next thing. I wanted to see for myself how everything hung together and felt that the teachers were making unjustified leaps and expecting me to just take their word for it. Isaac, the INTJ, on the other hand, was not so concerned about that as getting a usable answer as efficiently as possible, so his beef was usually that the teacher's methods were far too convoluted or slow. This leads into my next point, actually, the odd similarity between extroverted sensation and extroverted thinking. As I've discussed in my empirical versus interpretative videos, these two share a curious affinity for each other in that both seek to align the subject with objective manifest reality. But whereas extroverted sensation is only interested in this alignment on a perceptive, experiential level, like an actor giving an admirable performance, extroverted thinking is interested in aligning with reality in an effective way, not unlike the stage director arranging and organizing everyone and everything so that it works together to produce an admirable play. And in order to do so, extroverted thinking must understand a great number of things on the level necessary to get them working, never getting bogged down in unnecessary detail or mechanics that aren't going to have any bearing on the final product. To the introverted thinking type, this can make extroverted thinking seem almost insufferably shallow in its understanding and, by extension, highly social and overly trusting in their obtainment of knowledge. Because extroverted thinking doesn't care about knowing every part of the logical proof by which they got where they are, any more than they need to know every part of an engine in order to operate and maintain it. Whether their knowledge came from a third party, from observation, or from their own past reasoning does not matter to them, so long as they can accomplish what they feel they need to accomplish. Now, there is one more major point that I'd like to make about extroverted thinking in the ENTJ. Extroverted thinking considers its own self as part of the environment that needs organization, in the sense that they want it to align as much as possible with the external machinery of the world. They want themselves to be as efficient and effective as possible. This can be a very good thing, a very admirable thing, where the ENTJ demonstrates a very honest drive to improve themselves, to correct mistakes in their character, and otherwise develop themselves and others, right wrongs, foster justice and goodness, etc. But to achieve this, they are always far more strict with themselves than they are with anything outside of themselves, even to the unhealthy point of developing compulsive traits. That is, self-punishment utterly disproportionate to the nature of a perceived wrong, abusive, perfectionistic self-discipline. So on that happy note, which is a worst-case scenario, obviously, on to auxiliary introverted intuition. It is the SENI axis which distinguishes the ENTJ from the ESTJ, their extroverted thinking dominant cousin. As I've said on various other occasions, the difference here, in a word, is depth, intensity, and immediacy versus breadth, multifacetedness, and timelessness. The ENTJ's SENI axis makes conjectures from the given data, getting the most juice out of an idea right now, diving into a single point of view and bringing out its singular implications. The ESTJ's NESI axis, however, formulates conclusions from a panorama of investigated trails, always looking for more perspectives from which to view something. As Celebrity Types has pointed out, the NESI axis is more geared for writing a comprehensive encyclopedia on a subject, rather than the SENI's pointed, purposeful treatise. The point is that while the ESTJ is generally far more reserved, detail-grounded, and level in their TE approach to things, the ENTJ is far more excitable, even bombastic, acting from flashes of brilliance, leaping heart and soul into the accomplishment of a vision. Which leads into a discussion of introverted intuition proper. This is the part of the ENTJ that envisions how things should be extroverted thinking organized. While the ESTJ organizes things according to a personal SI tradition, the ENTJ organizes things according to a very future-oriented, novel vision of things. They are bold and far less reserved or restrained in the reach of their vision of how things should be. They see far and wide, and sometimes farther than their plans can actually reach. And added to this, they see with a personal clarity, the result of which is ambition, for which they are well known. It is because they maintain a much greater radius and a rather greater sense of visionary urgency for the manifestation of an organized environment than the ESTJ does. The ENTJ tends to conceive of things in terms of long-term projects, planning out all of the aspects of how these projects will be accomplished. There's a tendency, for lack of a better phrase, to think big. But importantly, they are not ones to fruitlessly fantasize. If they are looking into the future, they are approaching it with the same extroverted thinking concerns as everything else, and their plans are very methodical and thoroughly considered. The problem is more often their overestimation of scope, rather than not planning anything at all. Keeping in mind that NI concerns itself with beautiful possibilities and conjectures drawn onto reality, as it were, it is thus no wonder both why the ENTJ might be susceptible to getting lost in their thoughts and plans and not keeping their feet planted firmly enough on the ground, like the ESTJ, who contrastingly might never move their feet at all. This can also contribute to the nature of their dominant TE self-stricture, for with the aid of introverted intuition, their sense of scope and therefore of responsibility becomes far greater and weightier, as well as far easier to abstractly rationalize for themselves. This kind of mindset, however, also naturally applies itself to all speculative and abstract areas of thought, that is, things generally associated with philosophy. The ENTJ, at least in my experience, is generally very intrigued by philosophy, though usually only insofar as they assist in some form a better TE grasp on their environment. While NI is responsible for the visionary, projecting, and conjecturing part of the ENTJ, extroverted sensation is responsible for the part of them which wishes these visions were actualized in reality in a concrete, visceral form. Thus, they have a yearning relationship with extroverted sensation, typical of the tertiary functions. This desire is more present and clear to them than it is for the INTJ, whose SE is inferior. The INTJ is more likely to spend far more time in just the conjecturing part of things at the expense of yearning for them to make them truly concrete. Not so for the ENTJ, who is even more focused on making things a reality in a very real, palpable, practical way. This also differentiates them from the ESTJ, who is not seeking an external SE manifestation of a vision, but the NE compilation of an internal, assured, watertight SI worldview. They want this internal manifestation instead of an external manifestation. This notion of their desire to actualize things explains several other ENTJ characteristics. If we understand that actualization for the ENTJ means not just bringing things about, but bringing them about in a very real, palpable, externally perceivable way, then we can describe the energy and assertiveness of the ENTJ. The majority of ENTJs I have known have actually been classified by others as social introverts, but there is still this sense of energy and drive to their perceptions of things, almost like they are constantly trying to push their way through a garbage bag into the outside world. Just because their exterior is calm and composed does not mean that their interior is at all peaceful or settled. To continue the metaphor, one of the ways in which the ENTJ, quote, pushes through the bag is by presenting themselves as very professional, even suave, classy, or tastefully Epicurean. I have yet to see where this fails. This seems to pop up with every ENTJ, so please let me know if it's not the case. But whether they succeed in this, by the way, very much depends on the individual ENTJ. But it's just something I notice again and again, if not in their fashion of clothing, then in some aspects of their personal style. They like to experience the SE manifestation of success. One ENTJ friend of mine, for instance, was known to dress up in very nice shirts and suits and vests for just a regular day, because he liked the feeling of projecting that aspect of himself into the real world. It is my observation that function axes tend to have a dynamic motivation versus method, with the method being which function is more dominant and conscious, and the motivation being the inferior and less conscious. In other words, I have lately found that, generally speaking, one's dominant and auxiliary functions serve as one's preferred and comfortable method for harvesting the fruits of the tertiary and inferior functions. The dynamic between the auxiliary and tertiary is far less radical and more naturally balanced than that experienced between dominant and inferior, and therefore the desire to blend them becomes rather stronger. Thus, the ENTJ is ultimately motivated in their use of NI by their tertiary SE, which wants actualization of NI visions in the real world. Conversely, a type like the ISTP has auxiliary SE and tertiary NI, and thus their SE is in the service of NI, keenly observing things so that they can experience better NI conjectures. This does not mean that the type devalues or underappreciates their auxiliary at the expense of their tertiary, although I have observed this to happen in some cases. It's simply how they seem to interact with each other. If we apply these concepts to the dominant-inferior dynamic of the ENTJ, we find TE being the method by which the ENTJ seeks to manifest their FI desires. In the INTJ, this is the less strenuous axis, but for the ENTJ, this is the dominating one, posing the most difficult problems and creating the most vulnerability and sensitivity. This is the secret, somewhat enigmatic, but definitely present, warm and gooey core of the ENTJ that has been more recently emphasized in the community. Dang it. In fact, this notion of a deep feeling core is implicit in descriptions of dominant TE. I, for one, constantly say that the ENTJ has a drive and a deep desire to organize their environment. So how are we to conclude that the ENTJ has no feelings when clearly that is the motivation behind everything that they're doing? How they organize, why they organize, is determined by their introverted feeling values. But in exchange for their preference of extroverted thinking, the ENTJ does give up as direct a relationship with their FI as they might have otherwise, for instance if they were an INTJ. As a result, they are susceptible to losing touch with their inner values, resulting in their objective perceptions being more and more warped by untended subjective desires. Or, more commonly and less dramatically, a bit of an existential crisis might occur where the ENTJ realizes they cannot see clearly where they themselves, as individuals, really want to go, instead of where the objective machine drags them to. When they've passed through one of these existential crises, this is usually when the ENTJ will experiment quite a bit with their introverted feeling by insisting, sometimes with great forcefulness that almost, for lack of a better word, parodies the championship of the introverted feeling types. They insist that we must not trample on others' individual values. Dear viewer, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you would like to view more content like this in the future, please check out my Patreon page, linked here. Donations make it possible for me to continue producing content regularly and with greater care, and they also come with rewards and bonuses listed on the page. Either way, it really does mean the world to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I wish you the best.